Thanks very much. Yep, my name is Gemma Bell. I work for Environment Systems in Aberystwyth, West Wales. I'm afraid I'm another one of these people who are not marine ecologists at all. I'm here to talk about a mapping project that was undertaken last year, finished in March this year, mapping priority habitats and sports habitats in northwest England. It was for the Northwest Coastal Monitoring Framework. It's part of a number of regional monitoring programs for England, and this was created to provide a coordinated approach to collecting and sharing coastal data. This includes habitat data, and the collection of habitat data was coordinated by Channel Coastal Observatory. So the habitat data is used by regulating bodies such as Environment Agency, Natural England, local authorities to carry out their statutory obligations on reporting on the extent and condition of habitats. And it's also used as contextual information when carrying out appropriate assessments for shoreline management plans. So this project was for mapping priority habitats for northwest England, and this was overseen by Sefton Council. We worked in partnership with Nature Bureau, and it was to create a baseline habitat data set from Solwayfirth up here in Scotland down to River Dee, and the priority was to map habitats using integrated habitat management system, but we were also mapping to phase 1 as well. Base data we had available to do this was a suite of aerial photography in 10 by 10 kilometre tiles, red, green, blue photography, and also near infrared, 10 to 20 centimetre resolution. We also had LiDAR data sets, DTM and DSM, in 1 to 2 metre resolution tiles. These data sets were captured between May 2012 and July 2013. And we were mapping the landward side, and then in the seaward side it was the intertidal zone. So this is a broad summary of the method. First, we had to process and analyse the imagery, which was no small feat, mosaicing all of those tiles. And we tiled the imagery into each of these project regions. We had 22 project regions. We then created an urban mask, carried out aerial photograph interpretation, and then some validation with ground survey. Now, we needed an urban mask, but unfortunately we were unable to use Ordnance Survey Master Map, and this is because the intention was to provide a data set that would be freely available at the end and downloadable by everybody. So we've already heard that there are lots of licensing issues with data sets, and so we needed to find a way to overcome that. So we looked for alternatives. So we used Ordnance Survey Vector Map and OpenStreetMap, and filled in the gaps as best we could with hand digitising. And all of these urban areas then were given the same class. We didn't differentiate between urban types. We then carried out image segmentation within Trimble eCognition software. And this software allows you to load in a combination of vector and raster data sets. So our raster data sets were the red, green, blue, near infrared photography and the elevation data. And we could just overlay them, creating an image stack. And these were segmented based on differences in pixel color, in texture. And the software operator specifies the parameters, so the scale, compactness, and texture, and which bands of the imagery you're going to use. So we developed those segmentation rules, created image segments, and then we exported the segments as polygons. The software does also allow you to specify rules for classification, but that was not part of this project. Our project was for aerial photograph interpretation of the habitats. It wasn't for automated classification. So as we had our habitat polygons, we had a team of interpreters, and they were working in Quantum GIS. And we created a recording form so that they could just select the polygons and then attribute them in bulk. And we created the form because this then removed the problem of accidentally pushing caps lock or extra spaces between habitat classes, all kinds of irregularities in habitat recording. The polygons were then quality checked and sent to stakeholders at CCO, Sefton Council, and Natural England. The habitats we were recording we were capturing priority habitats and supporting habitats. We provided a list of 61 habitats initially. But this was just a generic list for the whole UK and contained many habitats that weren't within our area, such as dystrophic lakes and upland calcareous grassland, and lots of subtidal habitats that weren't within our remit. So they were removed from the list, but there are also a number of habitats that weren't in the list, a lot of supporting habitats such as improved grassland and coarse neutral grassland that were subsequently added. So these habitats were captured by manual aerial photograph interpretation and then translated to phase 1 using a crosswalk from many of the habitats. For some habitats there was no direct translation, and these were done manually. For example, grazing marsh pasture. Each of those grazing marsh pasture polygons were assessed manually and the most appropriate phase 1 habitats chosen. As you might notice, the segmentation created a huge number of polygons, and these needed to be consolidated, and so we used, we applied minimum mapping units to the habitats. We used 2 MMUs, 10 metres squared for the smaller habitats, reed beds and ponds, and a larger MMU of 500 metres squared for larger habitats like grasslands and woodlands. That's an example output there, the segmentation output being translated into habitat map, and then the polygon boundaries being removed through the MMU process. And this is an example of a region of salt marsh that's been mapped. And in this example, you can actually see a strength of the segmentation method is that it really follows the habitat boundaries very well and picks out the intricate salt marsh creeks and the small lagoons. And this is an example of a sand dune system and a comparison between the IHS and the phase 1 translation. So the ground survey was carried out by Nature Bureau, and they visited each project region, and this was a mixture of random and targeted survey. So for the random survey, a selection of grid squares was randomly generated for each project region, and they visited as many as they could, depending on accessibility. And then there was a targeted survey to send them to underrepresented habitats. So what was found from this was high spatial accuracy due to segmentation method, as we've seen especially within the salt marsh habitats. But the actual classification accuracy, although it came in at around 85% overall, it varied between habitat types. And what was found was the woodland habitats were mapped very, very well, although it was very difficult to distinguish between different types of woodland. For example, just looking down on the habitat using aerial photography, it's very difficult to distinguish between an oak woodland or a beech woodland. How do you distinguish that from looking down on the habitat? It's very, very difficult. And there are other challenges associated with the API, associated with canopy cover, image quality, and real-world change. This is an example of how canopy cover can obstruct the view of the habitat underneath. For example, here it's difficult to see that underneath there's a nice patch of fen. And if you're presented with a polygon like this, how do you classify it? Do you classify the trees or the underlying habitat? Do you make assumptions? Well, all we could do was classify what we can see. We didn't make any assumptions as to what was the underlying habitat. This is an example of how image quality can really affect the classification. This is the same area of beach that was classified at that was captured at different dates, and you can see in the top image there's much greater contrast, and it's much easier to pick out the areas of shingle and sand, whereas in the bottom image it all becomes a bit blurred. And this affects not just only the manual aerial photography interpretation, it also affects the segmentation process, because if we can't see clear boundaries here, it's the same problem for the software. There's no clear boundary between the different pixel types, and so it won't necessarily draw the right boundaries at the habitat interface. And here's an example of real-world change. You can see there's a very big difference here in the pattern of shingle, which really does emphasise that what we created as in our habitat map is a snapshot, at the time of image capture. And even as we can see, during the course of the image capture, between May 2012 and July 2013, a lot of changes occurred. But the habitat we created is a useful data set with many potential uses, and it's in the process of being uploaded onto the CCO website. I hope to complete this by Christmas. It will be freely available. We use as habitat inventory, carrying out change analysis, also wider landscape studies such as ecosystem service modelling, habitat connectivity analysis, and opportunity analysis. Well, thank you very much for your time. And
great, thank you so much. It's like segmentation approach. So